Hello guys, so you have copied this scale into your notes already, right? Or you've printed it out and put it in your notes. Now just set that to the side and we are going to work on some calculations with decibels. So title it up, decibels calculations in your notes, put the date. So this scale, we should mention, is pretty much just like you studied last year in chemistry. It is like the pH scale of acids and bases. It is a logarithmic scale. You want to write that down. What that means is, as we're going to find out very soon, that if you go from, for example, you would think that if you go from 20 to 40, the sound would get twice as loud, you know? But in fact, it gets much more than twice as loud, okay? What they do is when if you go from 20 to above 100 somewhere on the decibel scale, the sound is millions of times as loud. But that if writing it in a scale where we would say a jet taking off would be 1,000,000 and silent study room would be 20 is kind of difficult to deal with on a math level because the numbers just get too big. So they condense them down and they make this nice scale that only goes up to 140 using logs, which you might have learned about in math class, right? Same thing with pH. It changes exponents into numbers we could deal with. That's what logs do. All right, so this is our rule for how they made the scale work. Each jump of 10 decibels, so that means a jump from 10 to 20, or it could be 80 to 90, either way. Each jump of 10 decibels makes the sound 10 times louder. It's not plus 10, it's 10 times louder, okay? And that's very important, as we're going to apply that to a few problems here. So I'm going to ask you to write these problems down one step at a time. So maybe you could pause right now and then write down example 1 and copy the question here. The question says, how many times louder is a soft whisper than the north rim of the Grand Canyon? Okay, so pause, write that down, then we'll solve it. Okay, so now we're going to solve it. Let's underline the two things on the scale they mentioned. Soft whisper and north rim of Grand Canyon are both on the scale that you have in your notebook. So north rim of Grand Canyon is right here at 30. And soft whisper is right here at 40. Now let's apply our rule. Every time you jump by 10 decibels on the scale, it gets 10 times louder. So from here to here is one jump. That means one jump of 10 decibels, the sound is 10 times louder. So whispering is as if you hear 10 north rims of the Grand Canyon. That's how loud a whisper is, okay? Now pause and copy down example 2. Alright, since you've copied that down, now we're going to solve it. Underline urban residence and north rim of Grand Canyon. And we're going to look for those two on the scale. How many times louder is an urban residence? So urban residence is right here, number 50. So we're jumping from north rim of Grand Canyon, which is 30, to urban residence, which is at 50 decibels on the scale. And you can see the difference between those is 20 decibels, and that means we're going to have to jump from twice on the scale, 30 to 40, and then 40 to 50. So remember, 30 to 40, that's one jump, the sound gets 10 times louder. And now from 40 to 50, that's another jump, the sound gets 10 times louder again. So two jumps, you have to do 10 times 10. Every time you jump, you just say times 10, basically. So one jump, it got 10 times louder. The next jump, it got 10 times louder again. So what's 10 times 10? Well, It's 100. So when we jumped one place on the scale, the sound got 10 times louder, but when we jumped 2 places on the scale, the sound got 100 times louder with 2 zeros. We might see a pattern here. Let's do example 3. Pause and copy down the question in example 3. Let's underline the 2 things from the scale, 2 words from the scale: conversation and north rim of Grand Canyon. Conversation is right over here at 60. And we want to know how many times louder is that than the north rim of the Grand Canyon, which is still at 30 decibels. So how do we jump from 30 to 60? How many jumps do we have to make? 1 from 30 to 40, 2 from 40 to 50, and 1 more jump from 50 to 60. So it got 10 times louder, then 10 times louder, then 10 times louder again. So what's 10 times 10 times 10? You could even do that on your calculator. 3 jumps means you multiply by 10 3 times, and you get that you need 1,000 north rims of the Grand Canyon to be as loud as a regular conversation. That's a lot. But you see 3 jumps means that the sound gets actually 1,000 times louder, and 1,000 has 3 zeros. So 3 jumps means that there are 3 zeros in that number. And you could begin to see that the sound is getting very much louder. It's not 30 times louder, it's 1,000 times louder with 3 zeros, okay? Another way you could express that, instead of 1,000 times louder, is since you made 3 jumps, you could express it as 10 to the 3rd times louder. So either answer is good. I'm going to box both of them, 1,000 times louder and 10 to the 3rd. In the previous problem, I could box that as my answer, 100 times louder, or I could say that it is 10 to the 2 times louder. And you'll notice that the exponent corresponds to the number of jumps that you made on the scale. Even here, 10 to the 1, because you only had 1 jump. Okay? Now our last problem, let's apply it to a sound that is very loud, like a nightclub. Copy that down, and then we'll solve it together. Alright, now that you have copied that down, a nightclub is 110 decibels up here on the top of the scale, okay? And the north rim of the Grand Canyon is still at 30 decibels. How many jumps do you need to make to go from 30 to 110? Well, 1 jump from 30 to 40 is your first jump, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 jumps. That means that the sound gets 10 to the 8 times louder, based on our rule. You could also express that as 1 with 8 zeros. So it begins to get a little difficult to count your zeros if you express it that way, okay? And I want you to make a mistake. 100 million, that is. 100 million times louder. It's another way to write that. You know, 100 million Grand Canyon's pretty quiet to get as loud as a nightclub. Alright, so guys, try to stick with the exponent if you can. But if you're typing into Canvas, you might want to stick with writing out the zeros, which might be easier for you. Just be careful with counting the amount of zeros.